I love AFL. I eat, breathe and sleep it. I try my best to watch every game. I even follow the trades and the drafts in the off-season. So when it came to choosing a Class 12 project, I knew it had to have something to do with AFL. The Class 12 project is also an opportunity to learn about something that you have no idea about. I'd always had an interest in First Nations people, mainly from learning about their backgrounds, from watching footy, and really learning to respect Indigenous people like Eddie Betts and Adam Goods. I thought about the players that I felt really inspired by, like Marlon Pickett and Cyril Rioli. I knew from following these players' stories of the hardships they had on their journey to the AFL. I wanted to know about the issues that faced Indigenous youth. What were the parallels to my world? What was different? What opportunities were there to learn? After giving this all some collective thought, I settled on the question, what barriers do Indigenous youth have to education, and how does sport break down these barriers? Why is this question important? There are two key areas of importance. Firstly, through my research, I became more aware of the disparity between education outcomes for Indigenous versus non-Indigenous youth. Secondly, the overall importance of education as a key to improving the future of education for Indigenous youth. It is my opinion that sport can play an important role in these two key areas. When I discovered the facts, I was shocked. In Australia, Indigenous students in secondary education have a retention rate of 59% from year 8 to year 12, compared with 84.5% for non-Indigenous students. Regional differences are stark, with as low as 33% in the Northern Territory. Programs aiming to close the education gap by 2031 are in place, aiming for 96% of Indigenous Australians aged 20 to 24 to achieve a Year 12 qualification. When I found this out, I wanted to make positive change. I kept thinking about those statistics and I thought, maybe there's a way physical activity can help improve these outcomes for Indigenous youth. I knew that being physically active and involved in sports helped me balance the sedentary, head-focused activities of school. I knew for someone like myself, and I think for so many kids like me, the periods in a day where I can do PE or when I was younger and had the chance to have some outside free play made such a huge difference to my feeling about the school day. This outside activity and PE lessons made it easier to concentrate when I came back to the classroom. I figured this was the same for many Indigenous youth. I then wondered how much difference it could make in improving their education outcomes. I started by investigating different programs available to Indigenous youth. What I found was that sport is a major incentive. There are so many different sport-focused programs, but I targeted most of my research towards a foundation called Clontarf. Clontarf provides mentoring and AFL programs to Indigenous youth if they stay engaged in education. I decided that I wanted to get as close as I could to the program so I could learn more. Something I have always wanted to do is go to Alice Springs. So when I saw that Clontarf had a branch operating out of an all-Indigenous boarding school just out of Alice, I knew I wanted to be there. I began the task of emailing, and it took at least a month to even get a reply. So I kept making calls and connecting with people until I finally contacted the director. Getting everything in place to make the trip wasn't without its challenges. Something I needed to do was make a risk assessment and have a meeting with my parents and my principal, Liam, so he could go through my risk mitigation processes and hopefully give me the green light. I needed to think about all the possible risks and hazards, which was an interesting exercise as it was something I would have not otherwise thought about. Another challenge was improving my cultural awareness. I was going to be working with and interacting with Indigenous kids and staff, and I wanted to make sure I didn't unintentionally offend anyone. To resolve this problem, I read through a list of ethics I should use before working with Indigenous youth. Part of this was making sure I used the right terms while on my trip. For instance, even though I was living in Alice Springs, I learned that the land's Indigenous name was Arunte. At the time of planning my trip, Alice Springs had featured heavily in the media. It was my dad who told me about the curfew that applied to anyone under the age of 18 whilst I was booking my flights. The curfew stated that minors weren't allowed in the CBD between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. without a valid reason. Many people my age would have been daunted by going to a place like this with all these risks. I didn't think about the curfew again until I was in Alice Springs when I needed some food for dinner. Luckily, I wasn't staying in the CBD and I could walk to IGA where the curfew wasn't active. However, I still felt unsure, like I was doing something wrong. On my first full day in Alice, I decided to take myself off to watch a local footy game. I was keen to see what the standard was like up there. I love to watch Indigenous players because they're so skillful and naturally athletic. I talked to some locals about what it was like to live in Alice, and they told me city folk think it's a dangerous place to live, but I never had a problem with it. Independence played a big role in my project, especially given out that I set out to stay with a family and ended up being in Alice on my own. Some nights it was quite daunting. Even though I had things in place, if I got in strife, it hit me all at once. I was alone. However, I was delighted to explore a completely new place. It was an eye-opening experience in itself to step outside the comfortable bubble of my home in the Adelaide Hills. It felt very remote. It was pretty surreal to wake up to see the Chihuahua, West MacDonnell Ranges, in the background. Zooming out for a bit and reflecting on my project, now I'm at the end of it, I can say this project has scared me a lot and tested me in many places. For example, staying consistent, and especially in my thesis, which is a formal write-up we do for all of our research. I feel that without the support from my mum, I would have given up. Even though during my project, I was in a new space that was classified as dangerous and full of crime, this didn't scare me at all. The thing that scared me, however, the most in my Year 12 project was failing. However, for every stepping stone of this project, I've gone headfirst into the next thing and then the next thing. It has pushed me out of my comfort zone for sure. Not only living alone, but also the hours of study, gathering research that backs up that sport indeed does help Indigenous kids. I imagine so many different scenarios where my project could fail. For example, offending any Indigenous people that I had contact with unintentionally. Even my motivation dropping off was scary. I don't think it has too much, and I've been pretty consistent, which I'm proud of myself for. There were moments where I felt lost though. I tried to push through as best as I could with whatever task I had at hand, whether it be my risk assessment, planning my trip, or even the simple task of journaling. The most alarming moment was 2 weeks before my flight to Alice. The Clontarf staff expressed they weren't sure if they were allowed to give out work experience. Luckily, I convinced the team at Clontarf that I was just helping out and observing. I envision myself at the end, standing here as I am now, with this sense of achievement and satisfaction. That's what really kept me going. As I investigated my topic, I learned that indeed there is so much value in sports for Indigenous youth. It is one important factor in keeping kids engaged at school. There is plenty of science to back this up. However, there is more than just keeping the body and mind strong. The unexpected learnings from my project, along with golden thread along the way, are that sports are a vessel to convey passion, leadership, and connection. I'd like to demonstrate this by retelling my experience in Alice with Clontarf at Urara. As I entered the big gates at Urara College, I thought to myself, wow, this looks like a prison. Beyond the metal gates, the entire school was walled like a fortress. I later learned this was supposed to keep the boys in and the outsiders out. As I approached the grounds, I noticed that sports were being played everywhere. I liked this environment. I strolled through to the Oval at an all-Indigenous boarding school. This was completely new to me, but I wasn't a bit nervous. I was exhilarated to meet all these new people and to learn from them. The sun was hot, more of a tropical heat that I was used to from the freezing cold of the Adelaide Hills. The sky was an electric blue. When I think of Australia, this is what I think of. that bright blue sky and dry heat that crisps your skin, and footy. As I enter the Clontarf studio, there's kids playing pool, others playing music and eating from the array of food on the bench. Another group laughs and plays video games. Outside, there are 10 or so kids playing footy on the oval. The vibe is relaxed. I walk in, introduce myself to the director, and explain to the group why I was there. Understandably, the group is pretty quiet. Over the next few days, I set about to try and build connections and start conversations. Understandably, the group was pretty quiet. I was surprised that often when I tried to talk to some of the students, I didn't get a reply to my chatter. I understood there would be reservations about me just landing there and trying to get involved, but I really only felt that during those first few days. I felt like each day I showed up, communication got a little easier with the group. I showed my best humility and a listening ear, which helped the process. I learned to share a bit of my story in the hopes that the kids might share back. I tried to put any of the kids that I was working with in a position of power by saying things like, "You'll have to show me how this works," and I asked to just join in and play whatever was going on. So there wasn't even any need to talk. Day by day and interaction by interaction, some of the kids started to open up to me. My trip was an incredible journey that was vital for my project's evidence and coming together of key themes or golden threads that I mentioned above. The connections I made extended to the staff at Clontarf too. My biggest highlight was spending time with Cyril Rioli. It was Cyril's job to cook the breakfast barbecue after training in the morning. Each day I would cook with Cyril and he would talk to me either about his nephews that were in the AFL or was planned for the day. I enjoy these moments. It was an honour to work side by side with such a respected member of the Indigenous community. I learned from Clontarf while at Alice that leaders are a significant part of an Indigenous child's upbringing, and leaders can be anyone, female or male, it doesn't matter. The point is that leaders and role models can be helpful in supporting kids through school and life. Cyril was definitely one of these inspirational leaders. He's a looked up to person in the Indigenous community, showing how you can help Indigenous kids through sport and education. I think he's a great example of what my project is about, because he takes the time to get to know every kid from the school. There are a lot. Because he knows how important that connection is too. The Foundation Clontarf, since opening its first academy for 25 boys in the year 2000, the foundation has grown for over 11,000 boys in 168 schools across Australia. Since 2000, Clontarf has helped more than 6,815 young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men complete Year 12, find employment. Many of them have gone on to have successful careers, purchase property, start their young families, maintain healthy and fulfilling lives. They remain an important part of the Clontarf family and continue to provide support and guidance to the current boys participating in the program. One afternoon while at Clontarf, after training, the director Andrew gave me a lift home. He asked me if I wanted to come and take a drive through any of the government camps. We rolled through the entrance of the camp. I was shocked. Eyes wide open, there was litter strewn all along the roads. I noticed broken glass everywhere. Young kids played on the streets with a simple cricket bat and ball. I looked closer at the brightly coloured yet peeling houses. Some looked in decent condition with all windows still intact. Some, however, had mattresses out the front with the sleeping bags on them. Some had busted cars in the front yard. This was my major aha moment in my project, as I had read about the disadvantages experienced by some Indigenous children. It didn't really sink in until I went around to these camps. I reflected on my years of schooling, and then I look back now, I think I really struggled. Yet I had all these things in place that helped me to set me up for success. I then thought how hard it would be to reach success, given these conditions potentially without stability and support. I can see how important it was that Indigenous youth were able to access support programs like Clontarf. After returning from my trip, it was time to make my artefact. While away and purely focusing on my project, I thought a lot about what I could create for an artefact. After lots of brainstorming, I decided that I wanted to teach an Indigenous games elective to the students of our school. This was a great opportunity for me because the elective would build on my community aspect. For my elective, I worked with the Yalunga Traditional Indigenous Games website that had an archive of different traditional Indigenous games. I then wrote up some lesson plans on my laptop, giving myself a guide on what I was going to do week after week. Week 1 was great. I taught a game that Elise taught my class back in Year 9. I really enjoyed this game. It was called Boronjan. Boronjan is the name of the ball, which the game is traditionally played with. The Boronjan was made of kangaroo hide and stuffed with grass and sewn together with kangaroo tendons. For the remaining lessons, I taught more Indigenous games that I found on the Yalunga website. It was to my knowledge that I did a good job teaching and the students enjoy these Indigenous games. My plan for my artefact was to film my games being played via drone footage. It was lucky my good friend Gabe had a perfect drone for the job. I also compiled my own instructions for the game that will be left with the school so future classes can enjoy the game if they wish. Not only did I have a lot of fun teaching my elective, but I was also inspired by the leadership and teaching skills of the staff at Clontarf, which expanded on my connection with some of the 7 to 9 boys. I think over the course of my project, I've become a much more accepting person in everyday life. I try to see where the other person is coming from, being more compassionate and aware of everyone else's perspectives. I've been trying to look for connection in my daily life, and I've been looking for leadership opportunities in and outside school. An example of this is I've taken up a role coaching my little brother's basketball team. Before my Year 12 project, I don't think I would have had the patience for this. Watching the Clontarf staff work, modelling my own PE teacher Nick, and running the elective have all helped me become more patient and given me some of my own leadership skills. The hardest aspect of my project for me was the mental side, the negative self-talk, such as, this project's too academic for me, or I'm never going to understand the answers to this problem. I constantly need to remind myself to keep at it, do another journal entry, read another article. This was quite hard for me because I can be easily distracted. Just like my research, I use sports and physical activity to my advantage. I try to do as much academic work as possible, and then I'd go to the gym as a reward. When I got back from the gym, even if it was late at night, I could still manage to do a little bit more project work or homework. The most significant part of my project was making new connections with people. The new people that I got to meet on my trip, and even some of the kids from the Mount Barker Waldorf School that I got to spend time with in my elective. This was significant for me because a lot of them I'd never actually spoke to. This made my project feel real special. It's not surprising to me that meeting new people has been one of the highlights of my project because I really enjoy being on the ground and interacting and engaging with people. When I was in Alice Springs, I started to see connections being built between myself and some of the Indigenous youth. It was the last day of my big trip, and there were still a couple of boys that I hadn't talked to by Friday. I wanted to make this last day memorable. I approached the guys playing pool at the Clontarf studio and asked if they wanted to have a kick of the footy. These were the 3 lads from the first day who were a bit reserved and shy towards me. We kicked around together for a bit, and then one of the 3 spoke up. I think he said something like, "You're doing it all right." I just laughed and asked if he wouldn't mind helping me. So for the next half hour, the 3 boys tried to connect my form. This is the sort of connection that I love. At the beginning of the week, I thought there would be some kids that wouldn't open up to me, but this experience proved me wrong and warmed my heart. I love looking at this photo because for me, it's the pinnacle of my project. This photo signifies a lot of things like connection and mateship. However, breaking it down even further, it's a photo of a couple of mates that I made while in Alice Springs. They developed from me being friendly and open to exploring a new place, new people, and new ways of being and doing. These are the lads that were coaching my kicking skills. The week after I returned from Alice, these boys I met in Alice were playing a game as an Indigenous round opener to the SANFL. I went down to Woodville to watch. The Urara boys convincingly beat a team from the APY lands. I went onto the oval after the game and the boys were so happy to see me with warm smiles and even a few hugs. What connected me to these boys at Urara was a common passion, a love for AFL. During my practical experience at Clontarf, I observed sports having a positive relationship on both students and teachers. A relationship is built, leading to youth being more engaged, attentive, and happy to be in school. I knew it was positive leadership that could positively affect one's mindset. I tried to implement the leadership skills that I learned in Alice at my own school. I feel that I was able to do this and be a leader in my elective. I hope that my project brings awareness to students, parents, and teachers that all kids need time to be outside and be active if they are to maintain focus in the classroom. For my future, this learning and connection that I've already started with Indigenous youth, well, I hope it continues. As some of you may know, I plan to enter the police force next year, a job where it is important to have cultural awareness and positive leadership. I learned leadership skills through this project by surrounding myself with so many positive role models, including the Clontarf staff, my mentor, my PE teacher, and my parents. The question that remains is, how can we ensure that all kids have access to positive leadership? The thing that this project has taught me to value is connection and leadership. I made connections with people in Alice Springs, and I've learned skills about how to connect with people by finding their passions and sharing mine. These are gifts I hope to keep sharing. Thanks for listening.